Good afternoon, Lincoln. Mitzi Cruz here, host of Lincoln Live. And today we are super excited to be here live at Coppin Elementary, one of my very favorite schools in all of Lincoln. And we have Tiffany McGuire, who is a 5th grade teacher at Coppin. First of all, Tiffany, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. I love it. As my phone's ringing, so gotta love being a teacher.
You know, always on call, right?
Yes.
Never a moment. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
So I've lived here in Lincoln now for almost 16 years. I have 3 children who have all attended Carlin C. Coppin. I have 2 kids now at the middle school, and then I have a daughter who's a junior at the high school. And so I've taught here at Coppin for 7 years. This is my first year in the classroom as a full-time classroom teacher. Before now, I was serving as an intervention service provider where I was doing all the intervention work.
Sure. So reading and...
Yeah, just I actually most of the time worked with kids who needed like an extra push.
Yeah.
So that they could better enhance their writing skills, their reading skills, those types of things.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and so I understand there's a little bit of a different structure here at Coppin, right? You're specifically teaching a couple subjects, and then tell us about that.
Yes, so we've decided to teach, so Miss Robbins and I both have all of our kids together. So we don't think of the students as her class and my class, they're all our 5th graders. So together we have 68 5th graders.
Wow.
And so I teach all of the math, Miss Robbins teaches all of the history, and then we share our responsibilities in the afternoon with our language arts. She does the novel studies, and then I teach the writing. And that's a good part of why we're here today.
Yeah. So actually, perfect lead-in, tell us about your project.
So something I'm really passionate about is our social media and the usage of our kids with social media.
Yeah.
I found that our kids, our students in general, at the middle school, high school, elementary level, are all way more savvy in social media than I think most people realize. And so I started teaching in this unit, which is all about does social media help or hurt our communication. Okay. I started teaching in this unit 3 years ago, and it's interesting that even 3 years ago, most of my students, I had to teach them what social media was because they didn't even understand what it was.
Right.
And then this year was the first year where I had multiple students who not only knew what it was, they use several forms of social media, and they had experience in things like cyberbullying and being catfished and all of these things that I'm like, oh my goodness, you're only 10 years old.
Right.
Like, you should not know any of this.
Well, and the truth is, I think oftentimes as parents, you know, we want to trust our kids. We want to provide these different devices because we feel like they're growing up in a day and age where they're going to need to learn how to manipulate these to be successful in life as they're, you know, growing up. No one's born under a rock, all that, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, you know, we're kind of opening up a whole world to them that's it's really, it can be pretty scary.
Yes, and it's not always necessarily safe. And
right.
So I think that anything that's properly managed is good, as
Sure.
long as parents are watching the social media and that they're aware that they have their kids' passwords, that they know what they're on, that they read through what they're writing online. Right. Because I think that many of our parents would be surprised as to what their kids are actually writing when they go online and through social media.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think that number one, our kids, they can find themselves in situations where they're vulnerable to people who are looking for kids that may be going through different things or feeling certain ways. And so, I was having this conversation recently with my 16-year-old, who you also had. And she and I were talking about that, and I said, it's something when there's maybe an adult who's more experienced, whose brain is working differently than yours. You're being vulnerable, you're being transparent, you're sweet, you're putting it all out there, and then there's this person in the background that's saying, I'm this person, but I'm not really, it's not really who you're talking to. You're talking to this person that's grown and manipulating you and things like that. And she said, oh, I'm way too smart for that. And so
and you're like, but you aren't
right.
And the thing that I find that's interesting is that I think that the kids have this sense of security. They think that because they are behind their screen, that they can say things that they wouldn't normally be able to say or do in real life. And so one of the cons, so when we were talking about our project, we talked about the pros and cons of social media, the good things and the bad things. And one of the cons we talked about is that you don't always, you would say things on social media that you probably would never say in real life.
Right.
Because it's much easier to send a text that says, oh, I'm sorry I did that, than to tell somebody face to face, I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings.
Right.
And so these are the skills that our kids are losing, that they aren't able to have their face-to-face conversation.
Right.
We joke around that we told this unit starts with telling this story about these two students who are sitting in a room together, and they're both on their phones, and they're talking to each other on their phones instead of just having the conversation in person. And I think that that's kind of where we're headed, is that our students are losing the ability to speak to one another in a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, and this is kind of something that I've kind of pondered for the last couple of years, is when are we as a society going to kind of step back and say enough is enough? Our boundary has been totally crossed, and the family unit is suffering, personal relationships, and really that's what our whole lives are built around personal relationships.
Yes.
But now they're suffering, and another thing I think is toxic is that we have the tendency to look at what people are posting, and we're comparing our insides to their outsides, right?
Yes.
So all of these things, it can be motivational, but it can also be a double-edged sword when people have this false sense of, they see the result, they don't see what it took to get there.
Yeah, they don't see how many filters it took to make that picture look like it looks on Facebook or on Instagram, for example. And I think also that goes along with that is that the kids are getting a false sense of reality.
Right.
I think that they are thinking, that everything is sunshine and rainbows, and it just isn't how it is. There's very few people who are going to post all the negativity.
Right.
Also, as much negativity as they do this positive stuff.
Yeah.
And then along with that, as I lost my train of thought, I would say that I do, however, think that there are really good things about social media.
Absolutely.
I think there are things that social media has to offer our students that they wouldn't have otherwise. For example, I use a site called Class Dojo to communicate with my classroom. And so it's very easy for me to connect with both my students and their parents in a safe environment that they can message me, I can message them. We're the only two people who see it. And at our site, we even have it set up that I can message Miss Robin's students, and her students can also message me, so that we have this very open line of communication that we wouldn't have without social media.
Yeah, and it's funny, you sparked something. I was thinking about this commercial that I just saw where there was, I don't even remember who the person was, I just remember they had a medical question after hours, and so they were able to actually FaceTime their doctor.
Yes.
And what was that?
It was probably Kaiser.
Yeah. Well, in any case, I just thought, how cool is that? Because, a lot of times maybe you're a new parent, maybe, you don't want to take your kids out in the pouring rain or whatever, but there's a serious concern that you have, and now you're actually able to make that face-to-face contact with the doctor and say, does this look okay, or should we head in,
I think the thing to remember is that everything is good in moderation.
Sure.
I know that for my own children, I'm the mean mom. So my kids, I will take that back. I allowed my 16-year-old to have social media. She got an Instagram account when she turned 13, and she ended up deleting it herself over this past summer because she found that it had become a time suck for her, and that she was spending so much time on social media, and for no reason other than it's easy to sit down and you start scrolling, and then before you know it, you've watched 2 hours of videos about cats that you never cared about in the first place.
Right.
And so she made that decision on her own. That wasn't on us. But we decided then, I did a little more research into things like Instagram, for example. Yeah. And Instagram has a setting where you can set yourself to private so nobody else can see you. However, you can go and search, and you can search anything.
Right.
And you have access to so much.
Yeah.
And I just realized that I just want to keep my kids little, just a little bit longer.
That's right.
And so so I now have a 14 and a 12-year-old, and so my 14-year-old, who by my old rules or old standards would have been able to have an Instagram account, still does not have one. Just because I realized that it was not necessarily something that was positive in our family. And so I just think that it's just important that you sit down with your kids and that you have real conversations, that you explain to your kids, this is what social media is.
Right.
This is what can happen when you're on there. If you tell people all of this information, they're going to know way too much about you, and that's not safe.
That's right.
And so that's why I think that it's just really needs to be heavily watched by the parents.
You know what, and I appreciate what you said. I think that your daughter having the wisdom to do that on her own, that really, you know, that's our goal. I mean, our job as parents is to allow the kids to make these types of decisions, but give them the tools for that type of thing to happen while they're in your home.
Right.
You know, versus...
Well, you want them to make the mistakes now, because when they make those mistakes when they're out on their own, it's a lot harder to navigate without help of mom and dad.
That's right. Yeah. So tell us more. I mean, give us the details.
I'm like, welcome to my poster wall.
I love it.
Basically, what the assignment is that the students are supposed to form an opinion as to whether or not they think that social media the essential question is, does social media improve people's lives?
Sure.
Using social media, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We have numerous pros behind you, and then we also have numerous cons. And then behind me, just for the kids who may have had struggles, this is different forms of social media that is available.
Sure.
And there are things on there that I had no idea what they were.
Right.
And so that just tells me that I thought I was pretty with it as far as social media.
Yeah.
And I learned about some sites that I was totally unaware of. So therefore, that the world is changing so much faster than I can keep up with.
Right.
And these kids are good.
Yeah.
Like, they are gonna get it and get it quickly.
Yeah.
And so all of the students are asked to weigh both the pros and the cons, and then to formulate an opinion on what they believe. And then they right now they're in the process of writing just a rough draft of an essay.
Okay.
Now, I take things a little bit further than that. Everyone has to write the rough draft of the essay, but I believe that I use a practice called UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, and the idea is to let the kids do a project that they're passionate about. And so what they're going to do is take their information and their opinion that they've formed, and they have multiple options. They can create a board game, they can make a movie, a slideshow, they can use Scratch and do some online coding. They can write an essay, do a speech, I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
And honestly, the possibilities are endless.
Right.
I want it to be meaningful to them. I want them to come up with a project that means something.
Sure.
And so I have, most of my students have decided to work in groups, and I have one who is creating a board game that is similar to the game of life, where you have your two different pathways, and so you go through and you ask these questions, and depending on how you answer will be the path that your car takes on the board game. Another is doing like an interview similar to how you and I are, and they have two differing opinions, and they're trying to convince or persuade the other to take on their opinion. Then a few want to make a commercial about, I believe, the negative effects of social media, and then some who want to do like a short video. And so we will enter the next 2 weeks after this week will be when we enter into doing those projects, and I'm really excited to see what the kids come up with.
Yeah, wow, it sounds like there's so much creativity,
and they love it. I mean, so this right now what we're doing is kind of the nuts and bolts. It's kind of the I need to know that you can write an essay that's sharing your opinion, but after you prove to me you can do that, we get to do the fun stuff.
Right. That is awesome. So, you know, this show is extremely interactive, and we like to open the floor up to questions, comments from the audience.
Well, I gotta check my phone because the comments don't want to scroll up for me. So Sue Martin.
Hi, Sue. Sue is a grandmother of one of my students.
Mentioning that, I'm pretty sure she is talking about the Life Project.
Yes. Her granddaughter is doing that project.
Yeah, actually, so my daughter and her granddaughter just hung out.
Yes.
Okay. Janet asked, what age would you recommend before kids get on some form of social media?
I personally, like I mentioned before, I would honestly say they aren't ready for it until high school.
Absolutely.
I think